What happens when Saitama, the One-Punch Man, suddenly finds himself in the world of RWBY? In Remnant, the Grimm are terrifying monsters that push even the strongest huntsmen to their limits. But when Saitama arrives in the Emerald Forest, the rules of survival are about to change completely. After encountering Ruby Rose and Team RWBY, Saitama casually demonstrates a level of power that leaves everyone questioning what he really is. To Saitama, however, it's just another day, and he's mostly concerned about finding the nearest supermarket. So, what happens when the world's strongest hero enters a world already struggling against darkness? If you enjoy what-if crossover stories, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more amazing adventures. So sit tight, get comfortable, and let's get into the story. The moon over the kingdom of Vale was a constant reminder of everything broken in the world. Its shattered remains hung in the sky like a celestial graveyard, a silver warning that nothing, not even the heavens themselves, was safe from the creeping rot of the Grimm. In the Emerald Forest, the air was usually thick with the scent of pine and the low, guttural growls of monsters that existed only to extinguish the light of humanity. To the students of Beacon Academy, this was a training ground, a crucible, where the next generation of protectors was forged in the heat of life-or-death combat. To them, the Grimm were a nightmare made manifest, endless and terrifying. But as a dimensional ripple tore through the fabric of reality just north of the ruins, spilling a bald man in a cheap yellow jumpsuit onto the dirt, the Grimm were about to face something far more frightening than a hunter's blade. They were about to encounter the absolute boredom of a man who had already reached the end of his own story. Saitama sat up, rubbing the back of his head. The last thing he remembered was a particularly aggressive sale on premium kombu at the Z-City supermarket, followed by a sudden, jarring sensation of falling. He looked around, his deadpan expression failing to register the fact that he was no longer in a Japanese prefecture. The trees were the wrong shape, the air felt strangely vibrant, and the moon, well, the moon was a mess. Did a monster do that? Saitama muttered, staring at the lunar debris. That's going to make the tides really weird. I hope the supermarket didn't get hit. If the refrigeration goes out, the sale is definitely cancelled. He stood up, dusting off his red gloves. He was currently standing in a clearing, and the silence of the forest was being rapidly replaced by the sound of snapping branches and heavy rhythmic thuds. From the darkness of the tree line, a pair of glowing red eyes emerged, followed by dozens more. An alpha Beowulf, a creature of shadow and bone-white plating, stepped into the moonlight. It was twice the size of a man, its claws long enough to disembowel a bullhead transport in a single swipe. Behind it, a pack of lesser Beowulfs fanned out, their predatory instincts screaming that this hairless, unarmored primate was easy prey. Saitama didn't even move into a stance. He just stood there, his cape fluttering slightly in the evening breeze. "Hey, excuse me," he said, his voice flat and devoid of the terror the creatures usually inspired. "I'm looking for the shopping district. Is there a train station nearby? I think I might be in the wrong ward." The alpha Beowulf didn't answer with directions. It answered with a lunging roar, a sound that usually froze the blood of seasoned warriors. It cleared the distance in a heartbeat, its massive jaws snapping shut inches from Saitama's face. Or rather, where Saitama's face had been. With a movement so casual it looked like a glitch in reality, the man in yellow had simply stepped 2 inches to the left. "You're kind of rude," Saitama said, looking at the creature's flank. "Are you a new type of deep-sea king? You look like a big dog, but with more bone stuff on the outside. Is it armor? It looks expensive." The Beowulf swung a clawed arm in a wide arc, a blow that could have leveled a small building. Saitama didn't dodge this time, he just raised a hand and caught the claw. The impact created a shockwave that flattened the grass for 30 yards in every direction, but Saitama's arm didn't even tremble. The Beowulf's red eyes widened, an unusual flicker of animal confusion passing through its mindless, murderous instinct. It tried to pull away, but Saitama's grip was like a mountain. "I'm in a bit of a hurry," Saitama sighed. "I really don't want to miss the evening special. If you don't have a map, I'll just keep walking." Before the alpha could attempt another strike, a blur of red and silver tore through the air. A massive scythe, propelled by the blast of a high-caliber sniper round, slammed into the Beowulf's neck. The creature was knocked back, sliding across the dirt, as a young girl in a red hood landed gracefully between Saitama and the pack. "Get back!" Ruby Rose shouted, her voice filled with the frantic energy of a hero in training. "These are alphas! You don't have any aura! I can't feel it!" "You need to run while I draw their fire." Saitama blinked at her. "Aura? Is that like a brand of shampoo?" Ruby didn't have time to explain. She was already a whirlwind of motion, her scythe crescent rose, carving through the air with practiced lethality. Behind her, the rest of Team RWBY emerged from the brush. Weiss began summoning glyphs of shimmering ice. Blake Belladonna flickered through the shadows with her illusory clones, and Yang Xiaolong's gauntlets roared as she traded blows with the larger monsters. It was a symphony of coordinated violence, the kind of high-stakes battle that defined the lives of those on Remnant. But to Saitama, it looked like a lot of unnecessary work. "Wow, they're really putting in a lot of effort," Saitama observed, watching Yang punch a Beowulf into a tree. "That girl's hair is glowing. Is that a special effect? Must be expensive to maintain." "Sir, please!" Ruby yelled, dodging a swipe from a creep that had joined the fray. "Get to safety. We can't protect you if you stay in the middle of the kill zone." The Alpha Beowulf, recovered from Ruby's initial strike and now thoroughly enraged, ignored the girl with the scythe. It saw the bald man as the true insult to its nature, a being that stood in its presence without fear. It gathered all its strength, its muscles bulging beneath its dark fur, and launched itself into a final, desperate pounce. It was a killing blow, a strike of pure malice. Saitama looked up. He looked bored. He looked like a man who had just realized he left the oven on. "Fine," he said. "Normal punch." He didn't wind up. He didn't scream a technique name. He simply extended his fist. The world didn't just break. It seemed to scream. The sound of the impact wasn't a thud or a crack. It was a thunderclap that displaced the very atmosphere of the forest. The Alpha Beowulf didn't die. It ceased to exist. One moment it was a mass of muscle and bone, and the next, it was a fine black mist being blown backward by a localized hurricane. The shockwave from Saitama's fist didn't stop at the monster. It tore through the clearing, uprooting ancient trees and blasting the remaining pack of Grimm into nothingness. The sheer pressure of the air alone was enough to dissipate the creature's shadowy forms before they even hit the ground. When the dust settled, the clearing was twice as large as it had been 10 seconds ago. A long, straight trench had been carved into the earth, extending hundreds of feet into the woods until it hit the base of a cliffside, which now sported a massive, circular crater. Silence descended on the emerald forest. Team RWBY stood frozen in their combat stances. Ruby's jaw was literally hanging open. Weiss's ice glyphs flickered and died. Blake's hand trembled on the hilt of Gamble's shroud, and Yang's hair stopped glowing as she stared at the man in the yellow suit. Saitama pulled his fist back and shook it slightly. "Oh, good. I didn't get any of that black goop on my cape. That stuff is a nightmare to get out of spandex." He turned to the stunned teenage girls. "So, about that grocery store? Is it past those trees, or—" If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. Some things can't be fixed. Ruby was the first to find her voice, though it was an octave higher than usual. What semblance was that? I didn't see any dust. I didn't see a weapon. You just punched the air, and the sky turned inside out." Saitama tilted his head. "Semblance? No. I just work out a lot. Anyway, thanks for the help, I guess. You guys are pretty good at the flashy stuff." He began to walk past them, his red boots crunching on the shattered remains of the Alpha's bone mask. He didn't notice the black crow watching him from a high branch, nor did he feel the weight of the gaze coming from the distant tower of Beacon Academy, where a man with a cane was currently dropping his coffee mug in sheer, unadulterated disbelief. Saitama was in Remnant, and for the first time in history, the monsters weren't the ones at the top of the food chain. He was just a hero for fun, but in a world built on the struggle of the light against the dark, he was a sun that threatened to burn everything away. The elevator ride to the top of Beacon Tower was long, silent, and, in Saitama's opinion, entirely too dramatic. He stood between Ruby Rose and a tall, stern woman with a riding crop who had introduced herself as Glinda Goodwitch. Ruby was vibrating with a mix of awe and caffeinated anxiety, her silver eyes darting toward Saitama every few seconds, as if she expected him to spontaneously combust or perhaps bench press the elevator. Glinda, on the other hand, was staring at the back of Saitama's head with the clinical intensity of a scientist looking at a lab rat that had just learned to speak Latin. "So," Saitama said, breaking the silence, "does this place have a cafeteria? I haven't eaten since that guy with the bone face tried to eat me. I'm starting to get a headache." "We have world-class dining facilities, Mr. Saitama," Glinda replied, her voice tight. She adjusted her glasses, her mind clearly racing to categorize the man standing before her. "But first, Professor Ozpin requires a word. Your arrival has caused a significant amount of seismic activity, and several questions regarding the safety of our airspace." The doors slid open to reveal a sprawling office filled with the rhythmic ticking of 1,000 clockwork gears. At the center sat a man with silver hair and a green scarf, leaning over a desk while nursing a mug of cocoa. Professor Ozpin looked like a man who had seen everything the world of Remnant had to offer. But as his eyes met Saitama's dull, vacant stare, for the first time in several lifetimes, he found himself without a prepared speech. "Please, sit," Ozpin said, gesturing to a chair that looked far too expensive for Saitama's comfort. "Team RWBY has provided a very colorful account of your intervention in the Emerald Forest. They claim you destroyed an alpha Beowulf pack with a single strike, without a weapon, without dust, and, most perplexingly, without a semblance." Saitama sat down, his cape bunching up behind him. "Yeah, it was just one punch. Honestly, I was hoping for more of a workout. The big dog guy looked tough, but he popped like a balloon. It's the same thing every time. I'm starting to think I should have taken up a hobby that doesn't involve exploding things." Ozpin traded a glance with Glinda. The headmaster leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "Mr. Saitama, in this world, everyone has aura, a manifestation of the soul. It provides protection, enhances physical limits, and eventually blossoms into a semblance, a unique power. Even the most untrained civilian has a flicker of it. But you, when I look at you, I see nothing. To the senses of a hunter, you are a void, a ghost. And yet, you possess strength that defies the laws of physics as we know them. How?" Saitama scratched his cheek. "I get asked this a lot. Look, it's a pretty intense regimen. You probably wouldn't believe me if I told you." Ruby, who had been hovering near the doorway, leaned in. "Is it ancient magic? A secret Atlas experiment? Did you fall into a vat of refined gravity dust?" "No," Saitama said flatly. 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, 100 squats, and a 10-kilometer run. Every single day. Also, no air conditioning in the summer, or heat in the winter, to strengthen the mind. And 3 meals a day, just a banana for breakfast is fine." The silence that followed was so profound, it rivaled the vacuum of space. Glinda's riding crop twitched. Ozpin's mug hovered halfway to his mouth. Even Ruby looked like her brain had hit a recursive loop and crashed. That's just basic conditioning," Glinda finally hissed, her composure fracturing. "I've seen first-year students do more during their morning warm-ups. Are you mocking us?" "I knew you wouldn't believe me," Saitama sighed, leaning back. "Everyone says that. They start yelling about limits and biological impossibility. But I worked so hard I went bald. If that's not proof of commitment, I don't know what is." Ozpin set his mug down with a soft click. He didn't see a liar. He had lived long enough to recognize the difference between a deceptive man and a man who was simply too honest for the world to handle. He saw the genuine, soul-crushing boredom in Saitama's eyes, the look of a predator that had run out of prey. "Glinda," Ozpin said softly, "test him. Use the standard combat assessment. If what he says is true, or even if it isn't, we need to know what we are dealing with. The Vital Festival is approaching. The city is full of visitors. If a force like this is walking our streets, I'd rather it be as an ally." "An ally?" Glinda asked, her eyes narrowing. "Ozpin, he's an anomaly. He's a walking catastrophe." "I'm right here, you know," Saitama muttered. Half an hour later, Saitama found himself standing in the center of Beacon's combat arena. The floor was a complex weave of hard light projectors and reinforced steel, designed to withstand the devastating impacts of high-level hunter training. Team RWBY sat in the bleachers, joined by Team Jayanpur. Word had spread through the dorms like wildfire. A bald man in a yellow suit had supposedly ended an alpha pack with a slap, and now Glinda Goodwitch was going to put him in his place. "Mr. Saitama," Glinda said, her voice echoing through the arena's PA system. She stood on the opposite end, her crop held at the ready. I will be conducting a tiered assessment. We will start with a basic projectile test. Please defend yourself. With a flick of her wrist, Glinda used her telekinetic semblance to rip several large pieces of the arena's decorative stonework from the walls. They accelerated towards Saitama at terminal velocity, whistling through the air with enough force to crush a paladin mech. Saitama didn't move. He didn't even blink. As the first boulder reached him, he simply swatted it. His hand moved so fast it was invisible, and the massive stone didn't just break. It disintegrated into a fine powder that coated the floor like gray snow. The second, third, and fourth boulders met the same fate. Saitama looked like he was shooing away particularly persistent flies. The students in the stands were silent. Yang Xiaolong stood up, her eyes turning red. No way! He's not even using his hands. He's using the back of his fingers. He's flicking them away. Glinda's expression hardened. She didn't like being toyed with. She gestured sharply, and the very air in the arena began to shimmer. A localized storm of telekinetic energy swirled around Saitama, trying to lift him, to crush him, to pin him to the floor. The ground beneath his boots cracked and groaned under the mounting pressure, thousands of pounds of force pushing down on his shoulders. Saitama looked down at the floor. Hey, you're breaking the tile. Is that going to come out of my paycheck? I don't actually have a job yet, so I can't really afford a bill. How are you still standing? Glinda demanded, her power flaring until her cape whipped violently around her. I am exerting enough force to flatten a Nevermore. I don't know, Saitama said, taking a casual step forward. Then another. He walked through the telekinetic storm as if it were a mild headwind. Maybe you're just tired? It's been a long day for everyone. Maybe we can just call it a draw and go get some of that cocoa. He reached the center of the arena, and Glinda, driven by a rare flash of genuine frustration, gathered every ounce of her aura. She channeled it into a single, focused blast of pure kinetic energy, a beam of light that slammed into Saitama's chest. The impact caused a roar of white noise, and a cloud of dust and debris obscured the hero. When the smoke cleared, Saitama was still there. His yellow suit was slightly dusty. His red cape had a tiny fray at the edge. But he was unmoved. Okay, my turn, Saitama said. He didn't want to hurt the lady, but he figured he had to show something to get that meal ticket. He pulled his arm back, just a few inches. He didn't aim at Glinda. He aimed at the far wall of the arena, well above her head. He gave it a light tap. A consecutive normal poke. The resulting boom shattered the windows of the observation deck. A column of air pressure, shaped like a physical projectile, tore through the arena. It bypassed Glinda, the sheer wind of its passage nearly knocking her off her feet, and slammed into the reinforced, dust-hardened stadium wall. The wall, designed to survive a direct hit from a battleship's main cannon, didn't just hole. The entire section, nearly 50 feet of solid masonry and steel, simply vanished, leaving a jagged, circular window that looked out over the cliffs of Vale. Saitama lowered his hand and looked at Glinda, who was currently staring at the hole in the wall, with a look of pure, unadulterated terror. So, Saitama said, his stomach giving a loud, mournful growl. About that cafeteria? Is it buffet style, or do I have to pay by the plate? Because I've only got about 500 yen, and I'm pretty sure the exchange rate here is terrible. In his office, Ozpin watched the feed and slowly put his head in his hands. He had spent thousands of years preparing for a war of attrition against an immortal queen. He had built schools, nurtured heroes, and guarded relics. And now, a man who claimed to have gained the power of a god through basic calisthenics had just punched a hole in his favorite stadium because he was hungry. The board was no longer just flipped. The board had been turned into dust. The Amity Coliseum was a marvel of modern engineering, a massive floating stadium suspended in the sky by gravity dust, representing the unity of the four kingdoms. For the citizens of Remnant, it was the pinnacle of sport and culture, the place where the greatest young warriors proved their worth in the Vital Festival. But for Saitama, as he stood in the staging area wearing a borrowed Beacon Academy tracksuit over his yellow jumpsuit, it was just a very noisy place that reminded him of a televised martial arts tournament he'd once entered back home. He had ignored the politics, the history, and the intricate rules of the tournament. He had only heard one thing from the enthusiastic red-hooded girl who had become his de facto guide, The winner of the singles round received a massive cash prize and a lifetime supply of Vale's finest instant noodles. "Just remember, Mr. Saitama," Ruby whispered, her eyes wide as she adjusted his cape. "Professor Ozpin said you're a special guest participant. You have to try to make it look, like a fight? If you just blow people up, the audience will get scared, and the sponsors might cancel the noodle thing." Saitama nodded solemnly. "Right. Holding back. It's like playing with a kitten. Or a very fragile glass vase. I got it, Ruby. I'll be as gentle as a summer breeze." Ruby didn't look comforted. She had seen what his summer breeze did to a reinforced stadium wall. She watched him walk out into the light of the arena, his bald head gleaming under the artificial suns. Across the field, the crowd was roaring. Thousands of people from Atlas, Mistral, Vacuo, and Vale were cheering, waving banners, and screaming for blood and glory. In the VIP booth, Cinderfall sat with Emerald and Mercury, her amber eyes fixed on the newcomer. Her plan was already in motion. She had hacked the broadcast, seeded discontent, and was prepared to use the tournament's climax to trigger a Grimm invasion. But this man, the one Mercury had described as a walking error code, wasn't in her script. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed over the speakers. "In a special exhibition match, we have a newcomer who has taken Beacon by storm. He claims no kingdom. He claims no semblance. He is the man they call Saitama." The crowd's response was lukewarm. Compared to the flashy armor and intricate weapons of the other students, Saitama looked like a janitor who had gotten lost on his way to the broom closet. His opponent, on the other hand, was the picture of an Atlas elite. Mercury Black stepped into the ring, his mechanical legs clicking against the metal floor. He wore a cocky smirk, his gray eyes calculating. He had been told to test this guy, to see if the rumors of his strength were just Beacon propaganda. "So you're the guy who's been giving everyone a heart attack," Mercury said, his voice carrying through the microphones. He did a flashy spin kick, the jets in his boots hissing with steam. "I've seen guys like you before. All muscle, no technique. In this arena, speed is king. You won't even see me move." Saitama looked at Mercury's boots. "Oh, those are cool. Do they help with your height? I used to have a neighbor who wore lifts. He was very sensitive about it." Mercury's smirk flickered. "They're for kicking your head off, pal." The bell rang. Mercury moved like a blur of gray and black. He was a master of kickboxing, his mechanical legs allowing him to strike with the force of a battering ram at speeds that made him look like a phantom. He circled Saitama, unleashing a flurry of strikes. High, low, spinning, and direct. To the audience, it was a masterpiece of combat. To Team RWBY in the stands, it was terrifying. To Saitama, it was like watching a very slow-motion dance video. Mercury unleashed a heavy roundhouse aimed at Saitama's temple. Saitama tilted his head back an inch. Mercury followed up with a barrage of shots from his boot cannons, the projectiles exploding in a cloud of smoke and fire around the hero. The crowd cheered, thinking the match was over in seconds. But as the smoke cleared, Saitama was still standing there, picking a piece of lint off his glove. "Are you done?" Saitama asked. "I don't want to be rude, but I think the sun is starting to set and I want to get to the store before they close. My fridge is literally empty." Mercury's face twisted in rage. He went for his ultimate move, a whirlwind of kicks fueled by fire dust that turned him into a spinning cyclone of destruction. He slammed into Saitama's chest with everything he had, the impact creating a massive gout of flame that obscured the center of the ring. "He got him!" Emerald shouted from the booth. But inside the fire, Saitama was unyielding. Mercury felt it first, the sensation of hitting something that wasn't human. It was like kicking the core of a planet. His mechanical legs groaned, the metal beginning to stress and warp against the sheer, passive durability of Saitama's chest. "Okay," Saitama said. "My turn. I'll just tap you." Saitama reached out with 2 fingers. He intended to give Mercury a playful flick, the kind one might give to a bothersome insect. But Saitama had forgotten one crucial detail. The Amity Coliseum was currently floating in a low-gravity environment, and the floor was made of high-tensile steel designed to reflect energy. When Saitama's fingers made contact with Mercury's chest plate, the laws of motion decided to take a vacation. There was no sound at first, just a ripple in the air. Then, Mercury Black was gone. He didn't fall. He was erased from the center of the arena, transformed into a human projectile that shattered the sound barrier 3 times over, before he even cleared the ring's edge. He slammed into the far side of the Colosseum's defensive barrier, a shield designed to stop a paladin, and the barrier shattered like glass. Mercury continued into the sky, a twinkling star disappearing toward the horizon of the continent of Sanus. But the tap didn't stop there. The kinetic energy from the flick traveled downward, through Saitama's feet and into the structure of the Amity Colosseum itself. A massive, jagged crack appeared in the center of the arena, spreading like a lightning bolt across the entire stadium. The gravity dust crystals keeping the massive structure afloat flickered and groaned. The entire Colosseum tilted 10 degrees to the left, sending thousands of spectators screaming as they slid toward the edge. "Oops," Saitama said, his eyes widening as he looked at the crumbling floor. "Too much?" In the VIP booth, Cinderfall had stood up, her glass of wine shattered on the floor. Her face, usually a mask of calm, calculated evil, was pale with a mixture of shock and primal terror. Her plan to use the broadcast to spread fear was working, but not the way she wanted. The entire world wasn't watching the fall of a hero or the rise of the Grimm. They were watching a man in a yellow suit accidentally break the world's most advanced fortress with 2 fingers. The panic was absolute. Above the arena, the Grimm, attracted by the sudden surge of terror, began to swarm. A Nevermore, a giant avian monster the size of a small house, dived toward the cracked arena, its shrieks echoing through the chaos. Saitama looked up at the bird. He looked at the screaming people. He looked at the prize table, which was currently sliding toward a hole in the floor. "Hey, my noodles!" Saitama yelled. He didn't jump. He simply stepped off the ground with a bit more force than usual. The arena floor beneath him buckled, a crater 30 feet wide forming instantly, and Saitama soared into the air like a golden missile. He passed the Nevermore so fast the vacuum of his passage literally ripped the feathers off the creature, turning it into a plucked, screaming mess before it vanished into a cloud of black smoke. Saitama grabbed the falling crate of noodles mid-air, landed on a stabilizing pylon, and used his free hand to punch the pylon back into its socket, the sheer force of the blow realigning the stadium's levitation thrusters. The Colosseum shuddered, groaned, and leveled out. Saitama stood on the edge of the reconstructed arena, hugging his crate of noodles. He looked at the cameras which were still broadcasting to every kingdom in Remnant. "Is the match over?" he asked. "I think I won. Can I go now?" The world of Remnant stared back in silence. The Great War had been fought for years to decide the fate of nations. The maidens held the power of the seasons. Salem sat in her dark castle, plotting the end of existence. But as Saitama stood there, worried about his dinner while standing atop a floating fortress he had just accidentally dismantled and repaired, every person on the planet realized the same thing. The old rules of power were dead. The monsters and the gods didn't matter anymore. There was only the bald man, and the terrifying reality that he was bored. The aftermath of the Vital Festival incident was, in a word, exhausting. While the world's media outlets were busy debating whether Saitama was a secret Atlas superweapon or an ancient deity of destruction, the man himself was currently sitting on the floor of the Team RWBY dorm room, intensely focused on a plastic cup of instant noodles. He had been sequestered for his own safety, or more accurately, the safety of the public, while Ozpin and the council attempted to manage the diplomatic fallout of a man flicking a student into the next zip code. "You know, the broth is actually pretty good," Saitama said, slurping a noodle. "A bit salty, but it's got a nice kick. Is this fire dust flavored? It tingles." "Mr. Saitama, I really don't think you should be eating that," Weiss Schnee said, pacing the small room with her arms crossed. Her usual poise was frayed at the edges. That was supposed to be a commemorative prize. "It belongs in a museum, or at the very least, an evidence locker. Do you have any idea what you've done? The SDC stock prices are fluctuating because investors think you're going to punch the moon again." Saitama looked up, a stray noodle hanging from his lip. "I didn't punch the moon. I tapped a guy." "It's not my fault your stadium is made of cardboard." "It's not cardboard. It's reinforced titanium-infused masonry," Weiss screeched. "Same thing," Saitama muttered, returning to his soup. Yang Xiaolong was leaning against her bunk, watching him with a look that fluctuated between primal fear and a strange, desperate kind of respect. Her gauntlets, Ember Celica, were sitting on her desk, and for the first time since she'd started at Beacon, she hadn't touched them all day. "Hey, Baldy," she said, her voice unusually quiet. "Mercury? Is he even alive?" "Probably," Saitama said. I aimed for the sky so he wouldn't hit any buildings. He'll land eventually. People in my world are pretty sturdy. I assume it's the same here. Blake Belladonna, perched on her bed with a book she wasn't actually reading, looked over the top of the pages. In our world, people have aura to protect them. Mercury's aura probably shattered the moment you touched him. He's lucky if he's just a collection of broken ribs and a very long walk home. The door to the dorm room creaked open, and Ruby Rose poked her head in, looking uncharacteristically somber. Behind her stood Jean Arc, the leader of Team RWBY. Jean looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His armor was polished, but his shoulders were slumped, and his blue eyes were clouded with a deep, hollow sense of inadequacy. He had watched the broadcast. He had seen a man with no training, no family legacy, and no destiny achieve in a second what Jean had failed to achieve in years of grueling struggle. "Hey guys," Ruby said softly. Jean wanted to ask something. Saitama tossed his empty noodle cup into the trash can, which was already overflowing with similar containers. "Sure. Is it about the noodles? Because I'm out." Jean stepped into the room, his hands trembling slightly. He looked at the hero for fun. This man who occupied the space of a legend but possessed the presence of a bored salaryman. "How do you do it?" Jean asked, his voice cracking. "I've been training. I've been pushed. I've had my aura unlocked by one of the best fighters in the world. I've got a family name to live up to, and every day I wake up feeling like a fraud. I'm weak. I'm nothing compared to the Grimm, let alone the people in this room." He looked at Saitama, a desperate plea for a secret in his eyes. "What's the trick? What's the semblance that makes you so confident? Is it a mental block? A specific meditation? How do I get strong enough to actually protect my friends instead of just being the guy they have to save?" The girls went silent. Even Weiss stopped pacing. They all wanted the answer. They lived in a world where strength was everything, the only thing standing between humanity and total extinction. Saitama stood up, stretching his back. He looked at Jean, really looked at him. He didn't see a hunter. He saw a kid who was trying too hard. "You're thinking about it all wrong," Saitama said. His voice wasn't inspiring. It was just tired. "You keep talking about protecting and legacy and aura. You're looking for a shortcut. You want a special button you can press to make the bad guys go away. I just want to be useful," Jean shouted. "Being useful is just a job," Saitama replied, walking over to the window and looking out at the shattered moon. "I used to be like you. I wanted to be a hero. Wanted to be the guy who saved everyone. So I worked out. I pushed myself until my hair fell out and my bones felt like they were screaming, and I got what I wanted. I became the strongest." He turned back to Jean, and for a split second, the dullness in his eyes was replaced by a terrifying, cold emptiness. "But here's the thing. No one tells you about being the strongest. It's boring. It's the most boring thing in the world. When you can end any fight in one punch, the fight doesn't matter anymore. The struggle you're so worried about, that's the only thing that makes you feel alive. You're upset because you're struggling, but struggling is the proof that you're still growing." Saitama walked over and clapped a hand on Jean's shoulder. The boy buckled slightly under the weight of a hand that could shatter mountains. "If you want to be strong, just do the work," Saitama said. "Don't worry about being the hero or the leader. Just do your push-ups. Run until your lungs burn. Do it every day until you hate it. But don't be in such a hurry to get to the end. Because once you're at the top, there's nowhere left to go. You just end up sitting in a room eating noodles, hoping a big monster shows up so you can feel a little bit of excitement, only to be disappointed when it dies before you even get warm." Jean stared at him, stunned. He had expected a lecture on valor or a secret technique. Instead, he had been told that his greatest weakness, his struggle, was actually a luxury. "So, there's no secret?" Jean whispered. "The secret is that there are no secrets," Saitama said, walking toward the door. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I saw a flyer for a 2-for-1 pancake special in the dining hall. Nora told me about it. She seemed very intense. I don't want to get in her way." As Saitama left the room, the atmosphere changed. Jean didn't look cured of his insecurity, but the crushing weight of his destiny seemed a little lighter. He looked at his hands, then at Ruby, who gave him a small, encouraging nod. But while the students were finding perspective, the shadows of Beacon were deepening. In the communications room, Cinderfall was watching the recording of Saitama's speech through a hidden camera. She didn't care about his philosophy. She only cared about one thing. He was a variable that couldn't be controlled. Emerald, Cinder said into her scroll, her voice cold. Change of plans. We can't use Mercury anymore, and we can't rely on the fear of the Grimm to break the city if that man is there to swat them. We need to find out what he loves. We need to find his supermarket. Because if we can't kill him, we'll make sure he's too busy elsewhere when Beacon falls. On the other side of the campus, Saitama was walking toward the cafeteria, blissfully unaware that the most dangerous woman in Remnant was currently trying to figure out his grocery schedule. He was just a hero for fun, but in this world of tragic backstories and ancient wars, his sheer mundane nature was the most disruptive force of all. The docks of Vale were a labyrinth of rusted shipping containers, flickering halogen lights, and the pervasive smell of salt air and industrial grease. Under the cover of a torrential downpour, the White Fang were moving with a frantic, disciplined energy. This wasn't just another raid. It was a massive coordinated heist of refined dust, enough to power a small army or level a city block. For Adam Taurus, the high leader of the radicalized Faunus group, tonight was supposed to be a symphony of retribution. He stood atop a stack of crates, his red and black coat snapping in the wind, his mask hiding eyes that saw the world only in terms of oppressors and the oppressed. From the shadows of a nearby warehouse, Blake Belladonna watched with a knot of pure dread tightening in her chest. She had come here hoping to stop the shipment, but seeing Adam, seeing the cold, predatory way he moved, had paralyzed her. Beside her, Sun Wukong gripped his staff, his usual carefree grin replaced by a grim line. "That's him, isn't it?" Sun whispered, his voice barely audible over the rain. "The guy who's been causing all the trouble?" "That's Adam," Blake replied, her breath hitching. "We need to go. If he sees us, he won't just arrest us. He'll make an example of us." But Adam's attention was diverted. A lone figure was walking across the open pier, seemingly oblivious to the dozens of armed White Fang soldiers aiming rifles at him. He was wearing a translucent plastic poncho over a yellow jumpsuit, and he was squinting at a soggy piece of paper in his hand. "Excuse me," Saitama shouted, his voice echoing through the rainy docks. "The flyer said the grand opening tea sale was at Warehouse 9, but I've been around this block 3 times and all I see are guys in animal masks. Is this a costume party? Am I late for the tea?" The White Fang soldiers looked at each other, then at their leader. Adam leaped from the crates, landing in a perfect 3-point stance, 20 feet in front of Saitama. He stood slowly, drawing his sword, wilt, just an inch from its sheath. Blush. The red blade hummed with a malevolent energy. "Human," Adam spat, the word dripping with venom. "You have wandered into the graveyard of your kind. You think your ignorance will save you from the justice of the Faunus? You are nothing but another parasite on the back of this world." Saitama looked up from his flyer, blinking water out of his eyes. "Oh, hey, nice horns. Are they real? Also, you're standing on my flyer's map. Could you move? I'm worried the sale is going to end before I find the oolong." Adam's grip tightened on his hilt. The audacity of the man was staggering. He had seen the news from the Vital Festival, the anomaly who had shattered the arena. But Adam didn't believe in anomalies. He believed in power, in the blood he had shed to sharpen his spite. He believed that his semblance, Moonslice, could absorb and redirect any force in the world. "You think your circus tricks at the festival mean anything to me?" Adam growled. He began to pace, a wolf circling a sheep. "I have survived the mines. I have survived the brands of the Schnee. I am the end of your era. I am the revolution." "That's cool and all," Saitama said, folding his damp flyer into a neat square. "But seriously, is there tea here or not? Because if not, I'm just going to go home and watch the news. I think there's a documentary on sea salt starting soon." With a roar of pure, unadulterated rage, Adam moved. He was a blur of crimson, his speed fueled by years of combat and a hatred that burned hotter than any dust crystal. He drew Wilt in a single, fluid motion, the blade glowing with a terrifying red light. This was Moonslice, a strike that had cleaved through paladin armor and shattered the spirits of countless hunters. He aimed for Saitama's neck, intending to decapitate the hero in a single, glorious display of Faunus supremacy. Blake screamed from the shadows, "Saitama, move!" The red blade struck. There was a sound like a church bell being hit by a sledgehammer, a deep, vibrating clack that rattled the teeth of everyone on the docks. The shockwave of the impact sent the rain flying outward in a perfect sphere, clearing the air for a fraction of a second. Adam's eyes widened behind his mask. His blade hadn't cut through. It hadn't even scratched the skin. Wilt was pressed firmly against Saitama's trapezius muscle, and the hero was merely looking at the sword with a mild expression of curiosity. "Oh," Saitama said, "you're a ninja. I fought a ninja once. He was way faster than you, and he had a lot more accessories." "Your sword is kind of pretty, though. Is it a prop?" "Impossible," Adam hissed, his voice trembling. I channeled everything into that strike. My spite, my pain, the energy of 100 battles. You should be Ash." "Maybe you're just tired?" Saitama suggested. "It's late. It's raining." "I get cranky when I don't get enough sleep, too." Adam screamed, a raw, primal sound of shattered ego. He backed away, sheathing Wilt and immediately drawing it again, unleashing a flurry of moonslice strikes. Red slashes carved through the air, hitting Saitama's chest, his shoulders, his face. Each strike carried enough power to level a mountain, yet each one bounced off Saitama with a dull, metallic thud. The energy Adam was trying to redirect had nowhere to go. It was like trying to push the ocean with a toothpick. Finally, on the 12th strike, the unthinkable happened. Wilt, the sword that had been Adam's soul and his weapon for a decade, reached its structural limit. As it connected with Saitama's forehead, the red metal didn't just break. It shattered into 1,000 jagged shards that rained down onto the wet pavement like glass. Adam stood frozen, holding nothing but a broken hilt. The silence that followed was heavier than the rain. The White Fang soldiers began to back away, their rifles lowering. They had seen their God King break himself against a man who wasn't even trying. "My sword," Adam whispered, his worldview collapsing in real time. "My power." Saitama looked at the broken hilt, then at Adam's mask. "You know, you shouldn't play with sharp things in the rain. It's slippery. You could have really hurt yourself." Saitama reached out, intended to give Adam a reassuring pat on the shoulder, a gesture of pity for the cosplayer who had just ruined his toy. But even Saitama's reassuring pat was a force of nature. His hand connected with Adam's shoulder, and the ground beneath the Faunus leader instantly turned to powder. Adam wasn't launched into the sky, he was simply driven 6 inches into the concrete, the sheer pressure of the touch shattering his aura and sending him into unconsciousness instantly. Saitama looked at his hand, then at the slumped, mask-wearing man. "Whoops! I forgot he didn't have the big dog armor." Blake and Son stepped out from the shadows, their eyes wide. Blake looked at Adam, the man who had haunted her dreams, now discarded like a broken doll in a puddle. She looked at Saitama, who was currently trying to wring the water out of his plastic poncho. Is he dead?" Blake asked, her voice trembling. "Nah, he's just taking a nap," Saitama said. "Hey, you're the cat girl from the school, right? Do you know where Warehouse 9 is? I'm really craving that tea." Blake stared at him for a long moment, then started to laugh. It was a jagged, hysterical sound. The sound of a woman realizing that the great, terrible tragedy of her life had just been ended by a man looking for a grocery sale. It's 3 blocks that way, Saitama," she pointed, her hand shaking. "But I think they're closed." "Aw, man." Saitama slumped his shoulders, his cape dragging in the mud. "Every time! Why does the world always try to fight me right before the stores close? It's like a conspiracy." He turned and started walking away, his red boots splashing in the puddles. He didn't look back at the broken revolution he had just dismantled. He didn't care about the White Fang or the fate of the Faunus. He was just a man who had missed his tea, and in the dark, rainy night of Vale, that was the only tragedy he recognized. Cinderfall was a woman who believed in the absolute divinity of power. To her, the world was a collection of glass figurines, and she was the only one allowed to hold the hammer. Her entire existence had been a calculated climb from the gutter to the heights of mythological godhood. She had the Fall Maiden's power simmering beneath her skin, the backing of an immortal queen, and a plan that was currently dismantling the greatest kingdom on Remnant. But as she stood in the shadows of a luxury apartment overlooking the Vale skyline, watching the flickering screen of her scroll for the 100th time, the glass was starting to crack in ways she hadn't anticipated. The footage was grainy, taken from a rooftop security camera near the docks. It showed a man in a plastic poncho patting Adam Taurus on the shoulder. It showed the high leader of the White Fang, a man Cinder had spent months manipulating, being driven into the concrete like a tent stake. "It doesn't make sense," Emerald Sustrai whispered from the corner of the room. She was leaning against the wall, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her semblance allowed her to manipulate the perceptions of others, to make them see and hear whatever she desired. She dealt in the currency of lies, but Saitama was a truth so heavy it was breaking her scales. Mercury still hasn't come back. He sent a signal from a village near the coast of Vacuo. He said his legs are fused shut, and he's afraid to move because he might trigger the air pressure again. Cinder, what is he? Cinder didn't answer immediately. She turned away from the window, her amber eyes glowing with a faint, dangerous heat. He is an error, she finally said. A biological anomaly that the universe forgot to restrict. He doesn't have a soul we can sense, yet he exerts force that should require the collapse of a star. He isn't a hunter, he isn't a maiden, he is just there. We have to kill him, Emerald said, her voice rising. If he's at Beacon when we trigger the broadcast, the Grimm won't matter. He'll punch the dragon, Cinder. I saw what he did to that Nevermore. It wasn't even a fight. It was an eviction. Cinder smoothed her dress, her composure returning. You cannot kill a storm, Emerald. You can only steer it. If his mind is as simple as his appearance suggests, then he is susceptible to the one thing all-powerful men possess, a desire. We just haven't found his yet. Mercury failed because he tried to outmuscle a landslide. We will be smarter. The calculated risk began an hour later. Saitama was currently sitting on a park bench in the center of Vale, looking dejectedly at a broken vending machine. He had spent the morning trying to find a specific brand of hero-grade detergent that was supposedly on sale, only to find that the store had been closed due to unprecedented seismic activity. Emerald approached him cautiously, blending into the crowd of tourists and students. She wasn't wearing her combat gear, she looked like just another civilian, a young girl with mint green hair and a friendly smile. She sat on the other end of the bench, letting out a long, theatrical sigh. Tough day? She asked. Saitama looked over. Yeah, the machine ate my lien, and I really needed that soda. The air is kind of dusty today, isn't it? It's the festival, Emerald lied smoothly. Lots of excitement. My name's M. I'm a student from Haven. I'm Saitama. I'm a guy who's currently very thirsty. Emerald focused. This was the moment. She didn't need to overpower him. She just needed to slip into his mind and find the lever. She activated her semblance, weaving a complex web of sensory data. To anyone else, the park remained the same. But for Saitama, she began to build a vision. She wanted to see what would make him move, what would make him leave the city, or better yet, what would make him loyal to Cinder. She started with a monster. She projected the image of a Grimm unlike anything Remnant had ever seen. A beast the size of a skyscraper, radiating a terrifying aura of death. She waited for the flinch, the gasp, the sudden surge of adrenaline. Saitama just blinked. Is that a cloud? It looks like a poodle. A really angry poodle. Emerald frowned, her brow sweating. She shifted gears. She searched for greed. She filled his vision with piles of gold, with the relics of the kingdoms, with infinite power. Wow, Saitama said, leaning forward. Emerald felt a surge of triumph. That's a lot of shiny stuff. If I had that much gold, I could probably buy a whole grocery store. Then I wouldn't have to worry about the sales ending. I could just have the bread, all the bread. He slumped back, his expression returning to its default state of boredom. But then I'd have to manage the staff, and pay taxes, and deal with the health inspectors. Ugh, forget it. Too much paperwork. Emerald was starting to panic. Her semblance was straining. It was like trying to project a movie onto a wall that was made of black holes. There was no ego to latch onto, no deep-seated trauma to exploit, no burning ambition. Saitama was a man whose internal world was as flat and uncomplicated as a salt plain. Look, kid, Saitama said, turning to her. Emerald jumped. His eyes seemed to bore right through the illusion, though he didn't seem to realize it was there. You seem like you're trying really hard to tell me something, but I'm kind of distracted. Do you know if there's another machine around here? One that doesn't steal money? In a final, desperate move, Emerald poured everything she had into one last hallucination. She didn't go for fear or greed. She went for the one thing she had overheard him complaining about since he arrived. Suddenly, the park bench was gone. Saitama found himself standing in front of a sprawling infinite supermarket. The banners screamed 99% off everything. The aisles were filled with the highest quality meats, the freshest vegetables, and a specialized section for permanent baldness reversal cream. A voice over the intercom announced, "Saitama-sama, the sale will last forever, and there is no line at the checkout." Saitama's eyes went wide. His jaw dropped. A single, crystalline tear rolled down his cheek. It's beautiful," he whispered. Emerald leaned in, her voice a seductive purr. "It can be yours, Saitama. All you have to do is come with me. There's a woman who can give you this world. A woman who wants to help you find your purpose." Saitama reached out toward the imaginary stake, and then he stopped. He looked at the baldness reversal cream. He looked at the infinite aisles. Then, he looked at his own hand. "Wait a minute," Saitama said, his voice dropping an octave. The supermarket of dreams began to flicker. "This is too good. A sale that lasts forever? That's not a sale. That's just a price. The whole point of a sale is the struggle, the rush of getting there before the other housewives. The triumph of the bargain." He stood up, and the sheer force of his realization shattered Emerald's semblance like a hammer through a mirror. The park returned in a jarring flash of reality. Emerald gasped, clutching her head as the feedback from her broken illusion sent a spike of agony through her brain. "You're a fake!" Saitama shouted, pointing a finger at the terrified girl. "You tried to sell me on a world without struggle. That's not a dream, that's a nightmare. I told that kid Jean, struggling is the only thing that makes you feel alive. If the meat is always cheap, the meat has no value." Emerald scrambled backward, falling off the bench. She looked at Saitama, who was now genuinely angry, not because she was a villain, but because she had insulted the sanctity of couponing. I have to go," Emerald stammered, turning and bolting into the crowd. Saitama watched her go, huffing. Kids these days, no respect for the economy. Back at the apartment, Cinder watched Emerald collapse through the door, clutching her eyes and sobbing. The calculated risk had failed. Cinder looked back at the skyline of Vale, her grip on her glass so tight the crystal began to melt under the heat of her palm. "He isn't susceptible to desire," Cinder whispered, a cold realization dawning on her, "because he has already surpassed the world that provides it. He isn't a hero, and he isn't a villain. He is a force of nature that just wants to be a person." She turned to the shadows where a black glass sphere sat on a pedestal, waiting for her to report to Salem. "We cannot steer the storm," Cinder said to the empty room. "We can only pray that when the city burns, he's too busy looking for a different brand of detergent to notice the smoke." But deep down, Cinder knew. When the dragon finally rose over Beacon, Saitama wouldn't be distracted. He would be there. And for the first time in her life, Cinder Fall felt something she had spent her career inflicting on others. She felt small. The sky over Beacon Academy had turned the color of a fresh bruise, a sickly mixture of twilight purple and the smoky black of burning dust. The fall of Beacon had begun, not with a roar, but with a broadcast. Cinder Fall's voice, cold and manipulative, had echoed through every scroll and giant screen in the Vital Festival, painting a picture of a world where the protectors were the predators. The fear was instantaneous. It was a physical weight that settled over the city of Vale, a banquet of negative emotion that acted as a lighthouse for the creatures of the Grimm. In the distance, the mountains seemed to bleed black as thousands of winged monsters took flight, their screeches harmonizing with the sirens of a city in its death throes. Ironwood's pride, the Atlas Knights, had been subverted, their glowing blue eyes turning a murderous red as they turned their bayonets on the very civilians they were built to guard. The students of Beacon, mere children forced into the roles of soldiers, were scattered across the campus, fighting back to back against an endless tide of shadows. For Ruby, Yang, Blake, and Weiss, the world was ending. For them, every breath was a struggle, every swing of a weapon, a desperate prayer for survival. Saitama was currently standing on a cafeteria balcony, holding a lukewarm carton of milk he'd found in an abandoned vending machine. He watched as a squadron of Atlas gunships was swatted out of the sky by a swarm of griffins. He watched the fire, the explosions, and the frantic running of people in colorful armor. "Man," Saitama said, taking a sip of milk, "this festival really went off the rails. I thought there was going to be a parade. Instead, it's just a lot of property damage. I hope the dorms are insured. I left my spare socks in there." A pair of Atlas Knights clattered onto the balcony, their weapons sliding into position. They targeted the unidentified civilian, their processors calculating the most efficient way to execute him. Saitama didn't even look at them. As the first robot lunged with a vibrating blade, Saitama simply leaned his head to the side, his eyes fixed on a massive shape emerging from the clouds above the school. "Hey, look at that," Saitama muttered. The robots attacked in unison. Saitama's hand moved in a blur, two casual backhands that sent the machines flying off the balcony, with enough force to turn them into scrap metal before they even hit the courtyard. He stepped to the railing, squinting. From the peak of Mountain Glen, the wyvern had arrived. It was a beast of legend, a Grimm so large it defied the logic of biology. Its wingspan cast a shadow that blotted out the sun over the academy, and as it banked toward the main tower, it began to drip a viscous black liquid. Every drop that hit the ground bubbled and reformed into a new Grimm. Beowulfs, Ursai, and creeps clawing their way out of the earth like a plague. It was the ultimate weapon of Salem, a living factory of death, designed to ensure that Beacon would never rise again. The wyvern, known to the inner circle as Kevin, landed atop the CCT tower, its massive claws crushing the masonry. It let out a roar that shattered the remaining windows for miles, a sound of pure, primordial malice. "That's a really big pigeon," Saitama said, finishing his milk and tossing the carton into a nearby bin. "And it's making a mess. Does it have any idea how hard it is to clean black goo off of stone? The janitors are going to be furious." Below him, in the courtyard, Team RWBY was being pushed back by a horde of Alpha Ursai. RWBY looked up, her face pale as she saw the wyvern perched atop the tower, like a gargoyle of the apocalypse. "It's too big," she cried out. "We can't get close enough to hurt it. We have to try," Weiss shouted, summoning a giant knight with her hereditary glyphs, only for the summon to be crushed by a falling piece of debris. Saitama sighed. He didn't really want to get involved in student politics, but the noise was starting to give him a headache, and he was pretty sure the giant lizard was sitting on the room where the lifetime supply of noodles was being stored. He hopped over the railing, not falling, but descending with a weightless precision that defied gravity. He landed in the courtyard, right in front of Team RWBY, his cape snapping in the wind of an explosion. "Saitama!" RWBY gasped, her silver eyes filling with a desperate hope. "You have to do something. That thing, it's spawning more Grimm. It's going to destroy the school." "Yeah, I see it," Saitama said, looking up at the wyvern. The beast noticed him then, its glowing red eyes focusing on the small, yellow speck in the courtyard. It opened its maw, a dark, crackling energy beginning to gather in its throat. "It's kind of a nuisance, isn't it? It reminds me of the crows back home that used to pick at my trash bags." "Saitama, be careful!" Yang yelled. "That's not a Nevermore. That's an ancient." Saitama didn't wait for the lore dump. He took a single step, the stone tiles beneath his red boots spiderwebbing instantly, and he was gone. He didn't fly, he jumped. To the students below, it looked like a golden bolt of lightning had been fired from the earth toward the heavens. The wyvern unleashed its breath, a beam of pure, concentrated Grimm essence that could have vaporized a mountain. Saitama flew straight through the center of the beam. The dark energy parted around him like water around a keel, unable to even singe the hair he no longer had. He reached the level of the tower in less than a second. The wyvern, sensing a threat, lunged with its massive neck, its jaws open wide enough to swallow Saitama whole. Saitama didn't punch. Not yet. He just landed on the creature's snout, his weight causing the wyvern's head to slam into the side of the tower with a resounding boom. "Hey," Saitama said, standing on the creature's nose. The wyvern thrashed, its wings beating frantically, trying to dislodge the intruder. "You're being really loud. People are trying to have a crisis down there, and you're just making it worse. Plus, you're dripping that stuff everywhere. It's gross." The wyvern let out a strangled hiss, its claws raking at the stone. It tried to shake him off, but Saitama was an immovable object. He looked disappointed. He had hoped that something this big might actually survive a little bit of effort. He might have been able to practice a new move. "Well," Saitama said, raising a fist, "I guess I'll just shoo you away. Go find a different mountain to sit on." He didn't use a serious series move. He didn't even use a normal punch. He used something he'd been thinking about while watching the Atlas robots, the standard displacement slap. With a movement that looked like he was swatting a particularly large fly, Saitama's open palm connected with the wyvern's jaw. The sound wasn't a crack. It was the sound of a sonic boom occurring inside a vacuum. A physical wave of compressed air erupted from the point of impact, visible as a white ring that expanded outward for miles. The wyvern's massive head didn't just move, it was accelerated to 5 times the speed of sound in an instant. The creature's neck snapped like a dry twig, and its entire multi-ton body was lifted off the CCT tower as if it weighed nothing at all. The wyvern was launched. It didn't fall to the courtyard. It was sent hurtling across the sky, a black streak that cleared the clouds and disappeared over the horizon of the northern wastes in a matter of heartbeats. The shockwave from the slap was so intense that it blew away the smoke and fire from the academy grounds, momentarily clearing the air of Vale and revealing the stars above. Saitama stood on the edge of the tower, looking out at the empty sky. "Oh," he muttered. "I think I overdid the shooing part. I hope it doesn't land on a village." That would be a lot of paperwork. Down in the courtyard, the fighting had stopped. The Grimm that the wyvern had spawned were dissolving into smoke, their source of power gone. The Atlas robots had rebooted, their red eyes flickering back to blue as the localized virus was cleared by the sudden atmospheric shift. Thousands of students and soldiers were looking up at the tower, where a single man in a yellow jumpsuit was currently checking his cape for tears. Ruby Rose sank to her knees, a shaky laugh escaping her lips. He slapped it. He slapped the end of the world. But as the immediate threat vanished, Saitama looked toward the top of the tower, where the elevator was still functioning. He could feel something. Not a power, not a semblance, but a feeling of intense, concentrated malice coming from the roof. "I think the person in charge of the lizard is up there," Saitama said to the wind. "I should probably go tell them to pick up their mess." He began to walk toward the roof, his boots clacking on the stone. The fall of Beacon was supposed to be a tragedy that changed the world forever. It was supposed to be the day the light went out. But as Saitama pushed open the door to the roof, he found Cinderfall standing over the fallen body of Amber, the Fall Maiden. Cinder turned, her eyes burning with stolen godhood, her hands wreathed in flames that could melt steel. Saitama just blinked at her. "Are you the one who brought the bird? Because I'm going to need you to sign some insurance forms." The rooftop of the CCT tower was a stage set for a tragedy that would have defined a generation. It was here that destiny was supposed to be forged in blood, where the old world's secrets were meant to die and a new, darker era was to be born. Cinderfall stood at the center of it all, her body radiating an intensity that made the very air shimmer and warp. She had done it. She had murdered the previous maiden, siphoned the remaining essence of the seasons into her own soul, and stood as a living god among the ruins of Ozpin's greatest failure. Her eyes didn't just glow. They were twin suns of molten amber, and her hair whipped around her head in a localized storm of heat and cinders. She felt infinite. She felt like she could reach out and pluck the shattered moon from the sky. And then, the door to the roof creaked open, and a man in a yellow jumpsuit walked out, looking like he was searching for a misplaced TV remote. "Hey," Saitama said, his voice flat and unimpressive against the roar of the fires below. "You're the one who's been making all that noise with the speakers, right? And the big lizard? I'm pretty sure you're breaking at least half a dozen city ordinances. Also, you're standing on a crime scene. That's probably a fine." Cinder turned, her newfound power flaring instinctively. She didn't see a man, she saw an insult. She saw the creature that had slapped her master's greatest Grimm into the stratosphere. The arrogance that had fueled her rise for years curdled into a singular burning hatred. She was a maiden. She was the chosen of Salem. She was the fire that would consume the world. "You!" Cinder hissed, her voice layered with a supernatural resonance that made the floor tiles vibrate. "You are the anomaly, the mistake in the tapestry. You think because you are strong, the rules of this world do not apply to you? I am the fall. I am the inevitability of the end. I have the power of a goddess flowing through my veins, and you are nothing but a pebble in the path of a landslide." Saitama scratched his ear. "Landslide? Is that another one of those semblance things? Look, I've had a really long day. I've been poked, scanned, flicked into a stadium, and I had to walk up like 50 flights of stairs because the elevator smelled like burnt toast. Can we just skip the speech? Are you going to pick up the lizard or what?" Cinder's response was a scream of pure elemental fury. She didn't use a weapon, she became the weapon. With a flick of her wrists, the moisture in the air turned to superheated steam, and 2 massive blades of obsidian glass formed in her hands, glowing with the orange light of a forge. She vanished in a blur of heat, reappearing inches from Saitama. She unleashed a flurry of strikes that would have carved a mountain into a pebble, swings of pure, magical fire that reached temperatures high enough to turn the rooftop stone into magma. Saitama stood his ground. He didn't dodge. He didn't even raise his arms to parry. Each strike of the maiden's blades connected with his shoulders, his chest, his neck. The obsidian shattered upon impact, shards of glass flying across the roof like shrapnel, only to be reformed instantly by Cinder's will. To a witness, it would have looked like a goddess was hammering a golden statue. To Saitama, it felt like being pelted by particularly warm hailstones. "Is this part of the festival dance?" Saitama asked, his voice muffled by a gout of flame that Cinder blasted into his face. "It's a bit aggressive. I'm worried about my cape. It's dry clean only." Cinder backed away, her breathing heavy, her eyes wide with a burgeoning frantic terror. She unleashed the full power of the Fall Maiden. She summoned a pillar of fire from the base of the tower, a localized volcano that erupted through the roof, engulfing Saitama in a column of white-hot plasma that reached into the clouds. The heat was so intense that the metal supports of the CCT began to groan and buckle. "Die!" Cinder screamed, her hands thrust forward as she poured every ounce of her stolen soul into the inferno. "Burn away! Leave this world! You don't belong here!" For 30 seconds, the top of Beacon Tower was a star. Then, the fire began to die down, sucked back into the void. Saitama was still standing there. His yellow jumpsuit was scorched in a few places, and the edges of his red cape were charred and smoldering, but his skin was untouched. Not a single hair, if he had any, would have been out of place. He looked down at the frayed edge of his cape, and for the first time since he had arrived in Remnant, his expression changed. The boredom was gone. It was replaced by a deep, righteous indignation. "My cape," Saitama whispered. "This was a gift from the guys at the association back home. It was the only thing I had left that fit right." He looked at Cinder. The maiden took a step back, her knees trembling. She saw it then, the thing that Ozpin had sensed, the thing that Emerald had feared. She didn't see a hero. She saw the abyss. "You burned my cape," Saitama said, his voice dropping into a register that made the entire tower shudder. That's really annoying." Cinder tried to fly. She manifested wings of fire and launched herself into the air, desperate to put distance between herself and the man who wasn't human. She prepared to unleash a final, desperate blast of magic, a wave of energy that would have leveled the entire academy grounds just to ensure his destruction. Saitama didn't jump this time. He just stood on the roof, pulled his arm back, and delivered a normal punch to the air in front of him. He didn't hit Cinder. He didn't have to. The sheer displacement of air caused by his fist moving at relativistic speeds created a vacuum tunnel that sucked the oxygen right out of Cinder's lungs. The resulting shockwave slammed into the maiden like a physical wall made of lead. It wasn't just a hit, it was a total systemic failure of her magic. The Fall Maiden's power, sensing a force it could not comprehend, recoiled. The fire wings vanished. The obsidian blades dissolved. Cinder was sent tumbling through the air, skipping across the sky like a stone across water, until she slammed into the side of a distant mountain, with enough force to trigger a massive avalanche. The roof of the CCT was suddenly quiet, save for the crackling of the dying fires. Saitama stood there, looking at his fist, then at his charred cape. He sighed, a long, mournful sound. "Well, that's that, I guess," he muttered. "I really hope there's a tailor in this town, or a really good laundromat." Behind him, a young girl with red hair and bronze armor stumbled out onto the roof. Pyrrha Nikos had arrived, her shield dented, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had been ready to die. She had been ready to make the ultimate sacrifice to stop Cinder, to become the maiden herself if necessary. She looked at the empty roof, then at the man in the yellow suit who was currently trying to brush ash off his shoulder. Where is she?" Pyrrha asked, her voice trembling. "Where is the woman with the fire?" Saitama looked over. "Oh, the lady with the glass? She's over there." He pointed toward the mountain range miles away. "She was being kind of a jerk. She ruined my clothes, so I gave her a bit of a push. I think she's going to have a headache for a while." Pyrrha stared at him, then at the sky where the wyvern had been, then back at the man. She felt her worldview, her belief in destiny and the necessary sacrifice, shattering into a million pieces. The invincible girl realized that invincibility was a very small thing in the face of the man standing before her. "Who are you?" Pyrrha whispered. "I'm Saitama," he said, turning toward the elevator. "I'm a hero for fun. But honestly, this world is way too loud. I think I'm going to go find a quiet spot and see if I can find a map to a place that sells normal milk. This stuff here tastes like it was filtered through a rock." As Saitama walked past her, the fall of Beacon officially ended. Not with the destruction of the tower, and not with the death of a hero, but with the utter trivialization of the villain's master plan. Cinder was gone, the Grimm were retreating, and the Chosen was left standing on a roof, wondering if anything she had ever been taught actually mattered. Saitama reached the elevator and pressed the button. "And I still haven't found a decent sale," he grumbled. "What a waste of a Saturday." The Land of Darkness was a place where color went to die. It was a jagged, volcanic continent of obsidian peaks and purple-tinged skies, located in the northernmost reaches of Remnant. It was here that the god of darkness had once resided, and it was here that Salem, the queen of the Grimm, orchestrated the slow, methodical extinction of humanity. The very air was toxic, saturated with a malevolence that could choke the soul of a lesser being. Pools of black ichor, the spawning vats of the Grimm, bubbled and hissed, birthing monstrosities that had never seen the light of a kingdom. No hunter had ever set foot here and returned. No map existed for this place, for it was the heart of the void. Saitama was currently walking across a bridge of solidified lava, looking increasingly annoyed. He hadn't taken a boat, and he hadn't asked for directions. He had simply jumped from the shores of Sanus and skipped across the ocean like a flat stone, his boots creating sonic booms with every impact on the water's surface. He had followed the bad smell, a psychic and literal stench of decay, that had been wafting toward Beacon since the festival started. "Seriously, how big is this backyard?" Saitama grumbled, stopping to kick a pebble into a bubbling pool of black sludge. "I've been walking for 20 minutes. If this were Z-City, I'd have crossed 3 prefectures by now, and the weather is terrible. It's like a permanent goth phase up here. A pack of Barangles, massive, gorilla-like Grimm with bone-plated chests, dropped from the surrounding cliffs, surrounding the bald intruder. They didn't roar. They moved with a silent, coordinated lethality that suggested they were being controlled by a singular, distant will. From the shadows of a nearby spire, a seer Grimm, a floating, multi-tentacled jellyfish with a glowing central eye, watched Saitama. Through its eye, hundreds of miles away in her throne room, Salem was watching too. "Kill him," Salem's voice whispered through the seer, a cold command that rippled through the minds of the Barangles. The monsters lunged. Saitama didn't even stop walking. He simply swung his shopping bag, now containing a single, slightly bruised apple he'd found, in a wide arc. The bag, reinforced by nothing but Saitama's incidental grip, hit the lead Barangel with the force of a tectonic plate. The creature didn't just die, it was converted into a spray of black particles that coated its companions. Saitama continued to walk, his free hands swatting the remaining gorillas aside like they were bothersome curtains. "I'm looking for the manager!" Saitama shouted at the seer, which was currently bobbing in the air, its tentacles twitching in what looked like mechanical confusion. "Whoever's in charge of the big lizard!" "You've got a real pest problem, and I want to talk about the property damage." The seer darted away, retreating toward the massive, dark castle that sat atop the highest peak. Saitama followed it, his red boots crunching on the bone-strewn earth. He reached the gates of the fortress in less than a minute. The doors were made of a strange, indestructible black glass, reinforced with ancient magic. Standing before them were the remnants of Salem's inner circle, those who had stayed behind to guard the queen. Tyrion Kalos, the scorpion-tailed psychopath, was crouched atop a gargoyle, his golden eyes spinning in their sockets. Beside him stood Hazel Reynard, a man of immense physical stature, his arms already injected with raw fire and lightning dust crystals. "The intruder," Tyrion giggled, his blades clicking together. "The one who broke our little fall maiden. Oh, what a delicious, plain-looking snack you are. I wonder what your screams sound like. Do they have a rhythm? Do they have a soul?" "I'm here for the boss," Saitama said, pointing at the door. "Are you the receptionists? You're wearing a lot of belts. Is that a fashion thing here?" Hazel stepped forward, his eyes glowing with the agony of the dust burning in his veins. He didn't care about jokes. He saw a threat to the world he was trying to reset. "You will go no further," Hazel growled, his voice like grinding stones. He lunged, his massive fists wreathed in elemental fury. He unleashed a strike that had once leveled buildings, a blow backed by a lifetime of pain, and a semblance that allowed him to ignore the limits of his own body. The punch hit Saitama square in the chest. A shockwave tore through the courtyard, shattering the black glass of the fortress windows. Hazel's eyes widened. He had hit Saitama with everything he had, but the man hadn't even shifted his weight. "Oh," Saitama said, looking down at the giant's fist. "You're a heavy hitter. Do you do professional wrestling? I used to watch that on Sundays. But you should probably use gloves. Those crystals look like they'd give you a nasty rash." Saitama gave Hazel a light shove. It wasn't a punch. It was just a "please move" gesture. Hazel, a man who could trade blows with the strongest hunters in Remnant, was sent skidding backward 300 feet, his boots carving deep furrows into the obsidian floor, until he slammed into the fortress wall, embedded 6 feet deep in the masonry. Tyrion shrieked with laughter, leaping from his perch, his tail lashing out with a poison-tipped stinger. My turn. Let's see how you handle the goddess's sting." The tail struck Saitama's bald head with a loud tink. The stinger, capable of melting through reinforced steel and paralyzing an elephant in seconds, simply bent 90 degrees upon contact with Saitama's scalp. Tyrion froze mid-air, his laughter dying in his throat. "Hey, watch it," Saitama said, reaching up and grabbing the scorpion tail. "That's how you poke someone's eye out. You guys are really unsafe." With a casual flick of his wrist, Saitama swung Tyrion around like a lasso and tossed him over the horizon. The psycho's scream faded into a twinkle in the dark sky. Saitama turned back to the massive black doors. He sighed, adjusting his cape, which was still charred at the edges. "Okay, that's enough of that. I'm coming in." He didn't look for a handle. He just walked through the doors. He didn't break them off their hinges. He hit them with such localized velocity that the center of the doors simply turned into dust, leaving a Saitama-shaped silhouette in the ancient, magical glass. He walked down the long, shadowed hallway, past tapestries of ancient wars and pedestals holding dark relics. The air grew colder, the pressure of magic increasing, until the very walls seemed to groan. Finally, he reached the throne room. It was a cavernous space of black marble and purple light, overlooking a vista of the Grimm pools. At the end of the hall, sitting on a throne of bone, was Salem. She was beautiful and terrible, her skin as white as marble, her eyes a deep, veined red. She didn't look surprised. She had lived for millennia. She had seen the rise and fall of civilizations, the death of gods, and the end of magic. She looked at Saitama, her expression one of cold, academic curiosity. "So," Salem said, her voice like velvet and ice, "you are the one who has derailed the cycle. You are the man who does not belong. I have watched you, Saitama. I have felt the ripples of your movements. You possess a strength that should not exist in a world governed by the brother gods. Tell me, what is your purpose here? Have you come to serve, or have you come to die?" Saitama stopped at the foot of the dais. He looked at the immortal queen, then at the empty room. "I'm here because you're making too much noise," he said, his voice echoing in the chamber. "The big bird, the robots, the red-eyed lady. It's all very distracting. I was trying to find a quiet place to live, but your monsters keep showing up and breaking stuff. I want you to stop." Salem laughed, a soft, melodic sound that held no warmth. "Stop? I am the end, Saitama. I am the inevitability of the shadow. I cannot be stopped, and more importantly, I cannot be killed. I am cursed with immortality by the gods themselves. Even if you were to strike me down, I would simply reform. Your strength is irrelevant against the eternal." Saitama blinked. "So, you're saying even if I punch you, you'll just come back?" "Exactly," Salem said, leaning forward, a cruel smile touching her lips. "I am the one thing you cannot defeat with a fist. I am the eternal struggle you claim to desire." Saitama went silent for a moment. He looked at Salem, his dull eyes reflecting the purple light of the room. "The eternal struggle, huh?" He scratched his head. "That sounds like a lot of work. If I can't finish the fight, then I'm just going to be doing this forever. That's even worse than being bored." He looked around the throne room, then back at the Queen of the Grimm. "You know, you should really get a hobby. This whole destroying the world thing, it seems like you're just doing it because you've got nothing else to do. Have you tried gardening? Or maybe reading? I've got a great manga recommendation if you're interested." Salem's smile vanished. She raised a hand, and the shadows of the room coalesced into 1,000 sharp blades, all aimed at Saitama's heart. "I do not want your advice, human. I want your absence." "Fine," Saitama said, his voice becoming serious. "If you won't stop, then I'll just have to make sure you're too busy to bother me." He didn't move toward her. He just looked at the floor beneath his feet. "I can't kill you, but I can definitely change the scenery." Salem didn't have time to respond to the absurdity of a manga recommendation. She didn't have time to unleash the ancient dark sorcery she had spent centuries perfecting, the magic that had once challenged the gods themselves. She saw Saitama's expression shift from boredom to a mild, focused annoyance. He wasn't looking at her as a queen, or a monster, or an immortal. He was looking at her as a noisy neighbor who refused to turn down the music. "You said you're cursed to be here forever, right?" Saitama asked, his voice calm but carrying an unnatural weight. "And these black pools, they just keep making monsters. It's a bad cycle. It's like a leaky faucet that never stops dripping. If I can't turn off the water, I guess I'll just have to move the sink." Saitama didn't take a combat stance. He didn't even clench his teeth. He simply drew back his right fist, his eyes fixed on the black marble floor of the throne room. He wasn't aiming at Salem, he was aiming at the continent itself. "Serious series," Saitama muttered. Salem's red eyes widened. For the first time in 10,000 years, her instincts, the primal, animal parts of her soul that predated her immortality, screamed at her to run. The air in the room suddenly became heavy, the oxygen vibrating with a pressure so intense it felt like the weight of the ocean was pressing down on the castle. The purple light of the chamber was swallowed by a blinding white void. Serious table flip. Saitama's fist didn't hit the floor. It hit the very foundation of the tectonic plate. The sound wasn't a bang. It was a roar that seemed to come from the core of the planet, a sound so loud it transcended hearing and became a physical sensation of total displacement. The land of darkness didn't just shake, it was reorganized. The shockwave erupted from the castle in a perfect, glowing ring of kinetic energy. The black glass towers of Salem's fortress didn't crumble. They were pulverized into dust and launched into the upper atmosphere. The jagged obsidian mountains were flattened as if by the hand of a giant, the stone liquefying and then solidifying instantly into a flat, smooth plain. But the most significant change was the Grimm pools. The vast, bubbling lakes of black ichor, the source of every nightmare on Remnant, were hit by the atmospheric pressure of the punch. The liquid wasn't splashed, it was evaporated. The dark magic was torn apart at a molecular level, the sheer friction of the air pressure incinerating the essence of the Grimm, until there was nothing left but sterile, gray ash. The shockwave continued outward, clearing the toxic clouds that had choked the northern hemisphere for eons. For the first time in history, the sun shone directly onto the land of darkness, its golden light reflecting off the now glassy surface of the continent. When the dust finally settled, the castle was gone. The throne was gone. The Barangles, the seers, and the nightmares were gone. Salem was still there, standing in the center of a vast, silent wasteland of shimmering black glass. Her dress was tattered, her hair was a mess, and her white skin was covered in gray soot. She remained immortal. Not a scratch was on her, but she was entirely alone. The cycle she had spent millennia cultivating had been ended by a single physical correction. Saitama stood 20 feet away, his yellow jumpsuit surprisingly clean, though his red cape was now little more than a few scorched ribbons hanging from his shoulders. He looked around at the clear blue sky and the flat, quiet horizon. "There," Saitama said, dusting off his hands. "Much better. It's quiet now. You've got a nice view, and no more noisy pets to take care of. You can finally start that garden I was talking about. I hear succulents are easy to grow. They don't need much water." Salem didn't move. She didn't speak. She looked at her hands, then at the empty world around her. She was immortal, yes. She would live forever. But she was now an empress of nothing. The Grimm were gone. Her counsel was scattered to the winds, and the fear she had relied upon had been replaced by a crushing, absolute silence. She looked at Saitama, and for the first time in her eternal life, the Queen of the Grimm felt a spark of genuine human horror. It wasn't the horror of death, it was the horror of being irrelevant. "Why?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Why would you do this? The gods, they wanted a struggle. They wanted a balance of light and dark. The gods sound like they have too much free time," Saitama replied. turning his back on her and beginning to walk toward the southern horizon. I'm just a guy who wanted a quiet Saturday. If they have a problem with it, tell them to come find me. I'm usually at the grocery store around 5. Saitama didn't look back. He began to run, his feet creating small sonic booms as he accelerated across the glass plains, heading back toward the kingdoms where people were still picking up the pieces of a war that had suddenly, inexplicably, ended. The weeks that followed the Great Silence were the most confusing in Remnant's history. The Grimm didn't just retreat, they vanished. Without the pools in the north to replenish their numbers, the remaining monsters were hunted to extinction within a month by emboldened hunters and a jubilant public. The fall of Beacon was remembered not as the beginning of the end, but as the day the rules changed. In the Kingdom of Vale, life was returning to a new kind of normal. The schools were being rebuilt, the CCT was back online, and the fear that had defined human existence for centuries was fading into a strange, cautious optimism. Team RWBY sat in a small noodle shop in the commercial district, the same shop Saitama had been looking for since he arrived. He really did it, didn't he? Yang asked, staring at her bowl. Her arm had been saved, her sister was safe, and the dragon was still a twinkle in the northern sky. He just ended the war, just like that. Professor Ozpin says the world is going to be different now, Ruby said, her voice quiet. He says we don't have to be soldiers anymore. We can just be whatever we want. I still can't find him, Blake added, looking at her scroll. He's not at Beacon. He's not at the docks. It's like he just disappeared once things got quiet. Across the street, in a small, nondescript apartment, a bald man was sitting on a floor mat, intensely studying a newspaper circular. Saitama groaned, tossing the paper aside. I missed it, he shouted to the empty room. The buy one get one sale on seaweed. I was so busy dealing with that lady in the dark castle that I forgot what day it was. This world is a nightmare. He slumped back, looking up at the ceiling. He was still the strongest. He was still bored. But as he heard the distant sound of children laughing in the park and the lack of sirens in the air, he felt a small, nearly imperceptible sense of satisfaction. It wasn't the thrill of a fight, but it was something. He reached for a banana on his table, peeled it, and took a bite. Well, Saitama muttered, at least the milk here is finally starting to taste normal. Remnant was saved, but Saitama was still Saitama. He hadn't found a worthy opponent, and he hadn't found his way home. He had simply brought his own brand of mundane absolute to a world of tragic magic. The moon was still broken, the kingdoms still had their scars, and the memory of the hero for fun would eventually pass into myth. But for now, the sun was shining, and the monsters were gone. Conclusion. The arrival of Saitama in the world of Remnant didn't just shift the balance of power, it pulverized the scales. By treating the ancient, existential struggle of the Grimm as a series of minor chores and annoying errands, Saitama stripped the darkness of its power, its ability to inspire fear. Salem, the immortal queen who had spent lifetimes as the ultimate predator, was left as a ghost in a sterile wasteland, cursed to watch a world move on without her. For Team RWBY and the people of the Four Kingdoms, the what-if scenario provided a peace they never thought possible, but it came with its own existential crisis. What is a hunter without a hunt? What is a world built on sacrifice when the sacrifice is no longer needed? Saitama didn't give them answers. He only gave them the time to find their own. He remained an enigma, a man who possessed the power of a god, but only cared about the price of eggs. In the end, Remnant was no longer a stage for a tragic play, but a place where people could finally just live. Some things, like the moon and the lost lives, could never be fixed, but the future was finally theirs to write, even if the author was a bored man in a yellow suit.